So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Coaching with Empathy. My name is David Corcoran. I'm the EQ Professionals Manager here in Europe. And tonight I have three wonderful coaches with me, guests who are very proficient at what they do. And tonight's topic is coaching with empathy. We're going to have a panel discussion. And for those who are attending live tonight, welcome to you. It's really a pleasure to have you with us, and please interact via the chat. So if you'd like to ask a question of one of our panelists, you're very welcome to do so. So tonight's panelists are Elke Dervin, Justine McGrath, and Benoît Lamarre. Welcome to the 6 Seconds webinar, the final one for this year for the pro area. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
So I would really like to, of course, for you to know those who are watching, whether that's live, our attendees, or those who may be watching afterwards. But for you to just introduce yourselves as coaches, I'd like to hear a little bit about what you specialize in as such, just to hear a little bit more about you. So Elke, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yes. So hello, welcome everybody. My name is Elke. So I do work as a professional coach and as a trainer and facilitator, mainly in the areas of career, communication, self-leadership, and obviously in combination with emotional intelligence. So I do that primarily with clients from the international area, from the bigger UN family. But also, and Ilaria is here with us, I love to extend my work more and more into the education sector, because I believe that this is where it all starts, right? So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elke. We can explore a bit more. Justine, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, David. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Justine McGrath, and I run Proactive Coaching. So I run training programs, and I'm a trainer and a facilitator. And I run the programs mainly in the topic of emotional intelligence, as well as other leadership skills and things like change management and other leadership abilities. I'm also an ICF trained coach as well. So I use emotional intelligence in my coaching.
Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, I didn't ask you both where you're based, if you could include that for us. So, Justine?
Sorry, I live in North County Dublin, so I do some work in the Dublin area, but also sometimes in other cities in Ireland, so maybe Limerick, Cork, all over the place.
Great, fantastic. And Elke, I don't think you said it. Did you want to mention where you're from?
Yes, well, I'm based in French-speaking Switzerland, although I feel as a true European, I'm German, and I both work in English and French.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And that brings us to Benoît. If you would introduce yourself as well, please, and where you're from.
Absolutely. Very good evening, ladies and gents. My name is Benoît Lamarre. You can call me Ben. It's more international. I'm based in France. I'm an EQ coach specialized in emotional performance in sales and management. My job is to unlock EQ potential within sales teams to become performance drivers, and within managers to become inspiring leaders. I'm certified by 6 Seconds as EQ coach and by ICF as associate certified coach. Good to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben, Elke, and Justine. So I'm David, for those who don't know me, EQ Professionals Manager, Australian, but living in Vienna, Austria. And it's with this pleasure that I put together this panel, because I really feel that we represent different parts of Europe. And as Europe, we have many cultures, many languages, many ways in which, of course, we can develop our emotional intelligence skills as well. So if you'd like to reach out to any of our panelists, of course, please do so in your respective countries. We really want to see emotional intelligence spread right across Europe. And it's with that in mind that I just share a moment, a little bit more about 6 Seconds. If this may be the first time that you're interacting with us, we would like to see 1 billion people practicing the skills of emotional intelligence by 2039. So we're still well on our way towards our mission. And I know we've served around and worked with around 10 million people that have gone through our certification and training in the last 26 years. So that's quite a tremendous amount of people that are having a ripple effect, as the three of you are tonight, of course, in your emotional intelligence practices. And that's something that we really thank you for, but we want to celebrate, of course. And in your work as coaches, I think this skill of emotional intelligence, specifically empathy, is quite important as well. I'll just show this for those watching. Of course, many of the people attending tonight may already know about us. If you don't, I'd love to hear. Perhaps if you're brand new to 6 Seconds, do let us know in case we can be in touch with you. And we have colleagues like Ilaria Boffa joining the call tonight. So thanks for joining, Ilaria. But we have many ways. Elke, you mentioned before, education is a really important area to you as it is to us. And that's where we started. But we're not only involved in that, but in coaching, training, personal development. And really what we want to share is that we want you to learn, measure, and grow your emotional intelligence. So I have a question. Well, I use ChatGPT, the DALL-E program specifically, as
Sounds
you can tell
like
from this image for our 3 panelists tonight. And I typed in, show me 2 people engaged in empathy, or a coach, a life coach actually engaged in empathy. So I think we see the lady with the notepad is probably the coach, but engaging in empathy in some way. So I'd like to ask you, each of you, just to share a little bit of a thought around what is empathy to you specifically. Maybe Ben, you'd like to go first this time.
Sure. With pleasure. To answer this question, please allow me to step back a few years ago in my late 20s. I've discovered empathy because of a masterpiece of cinema. I've discovered empathy while watching a beautiful movie, Goodfellas, the 1990 film of Martin Scorsese, starring superstars like Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Ray Liotta. It narrates the rise and fall of a mafia associate, based on a true story. And in that movie, De Niro coaches Liotta to become a big man. And he has this beautiful line: you have to think like those around you. This had the effect of an atomic bomb in my brain. Think like those around you. I really tried, but you can't be in others' brains. So what happened? I developed other ways to connect. I developed other ways to read people, to understand, to reach, to work besides. So I opened all my sensors, I opened all my radars, and I started to pay attention to all the cues, all the signs that was happening in front of me: words, gestures, postures, breath, faces. And then it happens to be a turning point in my life. It was the birth of my emotional intelligence. It was the birth of my first EQ competency, empathy. For me, empathy is a link, is a non-judgmental connection. It's a chemistry. It's something that we have to practice, and it's something that is really powerful. It transcends performance, and it gives hope, I think.
Wow. That's a beautiful, beautiful way of sharing that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Elke, would you like to share your thoughts on empathy? We'll collate some and reflect at the end of this moment.
Yeah, well, very beautifully said. I really love the way that you shaped it and you expressed that, Benoît, and understanding the story behind. Well, for me, I am just connecting back because I'm coming out of a webinar for leaders in terms of communication and emotional intelligence. And empathy has been obviously a very big theme in there, in forming and creating trustful relationships, and the connection that means, and how do you form actually those trustful relationships through the presence, through the communication, through the active listening. So it's really a deep caring. I mean, when I bring it back to my own bubble that I'd like to form with my coachees, and to say it's like as if we are, yes, in an invisible bubble, or like a string that is connecting us, that is not tangible, it's something hard to capture, really, right? So it's putting words in it, to trying to kind of make sense of it, of what that really entails. But it is that deep caring, it's that presence of holding that moment with one another. And it's about, and I think it's more and more, it becomes harder in our societies, where the cognitive mind, where really the intelligence, the expertise level is overly valued, and where where then the heart mind really of really making sense between the head and the heart then only makes it to the full potential of what that really means. And we're losing out somehow, and that's a pity, because of time, because of pressure, because of all the agendas, of where then the empathy is at the heart of everything that we do. And it boils down to all the outcomes that we see that are not the quality anymore, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in the work performance, because there's a missing piece to the puzzle. And I think it is very, and I keep saying, it's coming down to the most basics, to remind ourselves of the most simple things to do, and it's that relationship. And spending time and carving out important moments, specifically also for leaders, to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow.
Beautiful.
Wow. There's so much to comb through here. Justine, though, your thoughts. Let's hold space for you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, tough gig to follow these two. Really great points both of them have made, and I concur completely with both of them. And I think for me, like Benoît likes the movie, I'm into the books. So for me, empathy started with a book. It was To Kill a Mockingbird. And it was Atticus Finch. So if any of you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. So Atticus Finch, in fact, there's a movie of it as well, and Atticus Finch is played by the beautiful Gregory Peck. But in this movie, it's about how he connects the neighborhood. It's all about racism, effectively, and it's about how he teaches his daughter Scout he says you have to walk around in somebody else's shoes to really understand them. And I thought, wow, that was really for me the first moment of, oh, that's what empathy is. But I didn't know it at the time, but it stuck with me, that, how he talks about trying to understand where other people are coming from, even though these people were not displaying great behavior. They were displaying racism. And he was like, but you have to understand them. You have to understand where they're coming from. So that was empathy for me. And another great writer, Mohsin Hamid, in the EQ Gym book, there's a quote in there which is, empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. And I think that's a wonderful quote. I think he wrote The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which, again, if any of you haven't read it, I highly recommend it as a novel. It's absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of empathy in that book because, again, he is completely misunderstood. People think that he's a terrorist, and he is the furthest thing from a terrorist. And it's again about understanding people and how people, you have to try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes, particularly when they come from a completely different culture. It's very, very difficult sometimes. So for me, empathy is that thing of getting into somebody else's shoes. What are they feeling? Where are they coming from? If their beliefs are different, why are their beliefs different? We're all born into this world as good people, I think, and we don't set out to be bad. So it's about trying to understand where somebody is coming from.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I love that. And I want to bring in a couple of voices from the chat here. So Paul Cheatham has said, for me, empathy is the sweet spot where connecting with ourselves and connecting with others meet. Yeah, absolutely. That echo, you might say as well. That's like, oh, there's your shoes. Maybe I could hop in your shoes now, kind of moment there. And then Ilaria, thank you. Also repeating, finding the echoes of others inside us. And I think you've sparked an idea perhaps for next year's content, Justine. We could have an EQ book club itself, like finding examples in books like that you're suggesting, and maybe others would like to suggest some titles too, but to spend a webinar or a meeting together where we would actually discuss the EQ that we read about in these novels. Of course, these are wonderful illustrations of how we can conduct our lives, and the example, maybe that's where this idea of standing in another's shoes comes from, because the book is an older book, and it's now in the vernacular. When I ask people in sessions, what is empathy, that's the response that they get. But I really want to highlight what all of you have said, Elke, this head and heart, this string of connectivity, you said. I love that. That's so beautiful. This idea that it's just like the delicate string, a fishing line, or a yarn of wool joining us, but not only in that, in the echoes of each other. because in that sense, you know, how do we truly know? But as you said, Benoît, then it's a combination of the non-judgmental connection, reviewing the senses, the body language, the cues, I guess, feeling into the non-verbal aspects that really our brains are processing at, you know, hundreds times faster than our conscious brain can even be aware of, to create that sense of rapport. I'm reading the very old but relevant book Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman at the moment, and it's quite a long book, so it's a lot to get through. But he talks about synchrony, that when we're in synchrony with someone, and as we all know, you know, mirror neurons go off, and it's the mirror neurons that actually help us to form the sort of empathic patterns together. And so he describes it a bit like a dance. He talks about the high road,
Right.
low road, and maybe you're familiar with his concepts, but you know, the high road is really that cognitive thinking aspect, whereas the low road is that emotional, heart-based aspect. And it's the low road that forms those connections. But of course, what we're talking about here is bringing that conscious awareness, saying, I wish to be empathic in this moment, and building the skills to do so. And we'll get into skills shortly, but I want to share just for a moment the sort of the technical or standard, the way in which empathy fits into our model. As you said, Ben, it's the competence that sort of kick-started your journey into EQ a little bit. So for those who are not familiar, but even just for those who are, let's re-recognize our model, the KCG model: know, choose, and give. And empathy falls into that give yourself part of the model. It's a particular pursuit, as we know, and increase is the verb that we've attached to that. Its definition by us, if that helps to know, is recognizing and appropriately responding to others' emotions. But I love the poetic nature of what you've all brought here tonight, this idea of, yeah, how do we walk alongside someone, sharing their shoes, drawing this connection together, and being able to use, you know, our own senses, but, you know, in this sort of non-judgmental way. I think that's perhaps really important. Another thing that we've talked about that you've all experienced is the 3 types of empathy. And I want to share this just in case you have some thoughts for you guys here. We talk about the 3 types. The cognitive empathy. Yes, I understand. I had a good situation today, actually. Another colleague mentioned that their grandfather passed away. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And they were explaining how, you know, they were 90, it was their time and so forth. And I realized all I wanted to do was go, yeah, my grandpa died too. He did a couple of years ago at 90, 91. And I shut that down. I made sure in that moment that I didn't blurt that out to try and build rapport with my friend, because that's just sympathy. That's just me wanting to give my 2 cents worth to her rather than feeling with her. And so I delved deeper into that moment by saying, yeah, you know, were you close to your grandfather? And I could feel that she was, yeah, you know, somewhat close. I don't know this person so well, but I was able to kind of stop myself from just, you know, trying to build rapport, but in the wrong way. Maybe we recognize. So cognitive empathy does that sometimes. Emotive empathy, where we feel with another. This lady didn't need to feel so much, but we then move towards empathic action. So I stand without fixing. So I just said to her at the end in German, you know, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here for you, but in English, because I teach English in another area. So, you know, making light, but building a hopeful connection with this person, rather than, I think sometimes we're very tempted, which I don't believe is empathy, when we just add in our 2 cents worth of information, or we try to connect it to something in our lives. Would you agree with that idea? Did I walk the steps of empathy today by not talking to my colleague about my grandpa, do you think?
Absolutely, if I may. I think, you know, this model is beautiful because it's the combo of different types of empathy, and it's the only way to keep the reins at hand. It's the only way not being a sponge and not suffering of this potential empathy. So this model allows us to take empathy like a superpower, you know, and to do something of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Not sponging, because that's probably a difficulty with empathy, is that maybe for those who enjoy the feeling part, I often use the example, how does a psychotherapist work? If they had to have 5 to 7 clients a day and they were sponging in the kind of pain or the regret or the trauma, the sorrow, and feeling with
Absolutely.
their clients, where would that lead them and leave them, lead them down a path to burnout and leave them feeling exhausted, I could imagine. You're all coaches, so do you have a similar experience in that sense? Elke or Justine, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, maybe if I may, just to reconnect to the circles and the empathetic action, and I think reconnecting to what I said before in terms of the head mind being so valued and overestimated, and the pressure that comes with that. And I think again, specifically with people in leading positions, that they put pressure on themselves by saying, "Oh, we have to have the answer. We have to be fixing it. I have to give that knowledge." But sometimes also and that's where, a lot of feedback comes in, of wanting to experiment with just being in that space and holding a moment and being okay with not having the answer, or not being able or even needing to provide the answer with. And that, I think, it's particularly hard because it's that almost holding back, as he was describing it, of holding what would be maybe a habit to jump into, but with a good intention of wanting to do good, but understanding that actually that might not be what the other person's needs are in that very moment. And that's typically it's holding that and understanding where they're coming from and what they are most in need of, and not what maybe must be most fulfilling for us in that very moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Elke makes a brilliant point there, because, and I think, David, it's kind of reinforcing what you were saying about just being there for your colleague, and just, I love that expression, just, I stand with you, but you don't have to say anything, and I've two brilliant examples of this, of where one of them is a friend of mine who works in the mental health area she works with adolescents in Northern Ireland in the area of mental health. But as a friend, if I'm talking about something or I have a problem, she will just sit and listen. And sometimes I'm almost like, are you there? But she's very, very good, as Elke said, at just holding that space for you. And it's so beautifully done. Sometimes she knows not to say or to give her opinion sometimes, or to judge, or to, that empathy piece is just, I hear you, and sometimes that's all she says, I hear you. And the other example I have was a really great example of, again, another medical professional, but when my dad had cancer, and he was ill and he was dying effectively, and the consultant had to break the bad news that the drugs weren't working and there was nothing more they could do. Now, that is a horrible conversation to have with anybody. It's horrific. And obviously it was exceptionally difficult for me to hear, but he just did it so beautifully, because he didn't, for me, the worst thing would have been if he had tried to give me loads of sympathy, because, obviously at that stage I was just, completely floored, but he held, as Elke said, he held space. He just sat and said, I'm here if you have any questions. And he just sat in silence while because I needed that space to just gather myself. So I think empathy, a lot of it is understanding what the other person is going through in that moment, and just being able to say, what is the right behavior right now? Is it, and of course we always want to jump in, but sometimes it's just to back off and say, they'll get there. They just need that moment to reflect.
That's great. Yeah. And what do they need? Coming back to your thought, Ben, about cues and verbal body language. This was a colleague I didn't really know so well. So I found myself too wanting to maybe offer a hug. Well, she doesn't want that. If she wanted something, she would say, hey, I need this. Or can you give me an example? Has this ever happened to you? So, people will invite us to interact with them if we remain, I guess, curious to that. Elke, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something or add something further?
Yeah, sorry. I was just making the link in terms of, again, bouncing off what Justine said. I think that's where coaching is so important, because we kind of, in the days, this is not a competency in holding that space and listening without fixing. It's just being there, as you said, Justine. It is And that's where coaching is so important.
Yeah.
It's being obviously a sounding board for people, but it's just sometimes just being in that being mode for them.
Do you find that people want that from you, as opposed to come and help me get fixed or give me your advice?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they just need to feel heard and understood.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily find that space neither in the professional area, where everyone is rushing and hunting behind the agenda items, and family likewise, because it's piling up. There's always, we're in a doer mode, and just in the being mode isn't necessarily it's luxury nowadays.
We can bring that. Yeah. Ben, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I feel like if I can say that, I have another relationship as a coach. I have another relationship with my empathy and with empathy overall. I mean, I had a few lives before being a coach in the luxury industry, in sales and retail management. And in sales, as in management, I used empathy as a tool to sell, to connect, to lead. I was like the maestro of my empathy. And I feel like I was much more in control. And then in coaching, it's like as Elke said, I think a bubble, a cushion, something, a safety area that you have between your coach and yourself. And I could not describe. I still try to understand this new level of empathy, which is in coaching much different than in other areas. I feel.
Yeah, I guess as coaches, I too am an ICF coach. It's a skill. We have to practice that. We might be sort of good at empathy, like your friend Justine, as you said, but she's also trained in specific ways. But she could differentiate, as you could, Ben. Okay, this was my work style of empathy, and now this is a more personable style of empathy that I want to bring through as well. So,
and if I may add, as a coach, you have already so many ways to lose the pace during a conversation. So many thoughts coming inside the brain, that this empathy can definitely be too much to carry. So it's really sensitive, delicate while coaching.
Yeah. And I guess that's why it's in the give yourself part of our model, because it's something we also give ourselves as coaches in the moment, as well as being able to share it and give it to others. Give yourself is often about the outward focus, yes, but we also have to give ourselves empathy. As you said, maybe different thoughts, different ways. We sort of go into problem solving mode, as was mentioned earlier, or fixing, hearing and fixing. But where do we allow the person to fix themselves versus holding that space? In some of my experiences, maybe it's particularly with the type of coaching I do around the voice, is that sometimes people need more of a trainer than a coach moment. But I try to slip back into that coach moment and say, yeah, how does this work for you? What's coming up? Holding that space and allowing them just to reflect and talk on what they're doing. So yeah, really nice. I just want to draw attention to some of our chat. So thanks, Paul, for the reference to Inside Out, the movie Inside Out. Inside Out 2 is also quite good, not only for emotional intelligence, but I think, yes, the way sadness sits with Bing Bong, the character there, where, different emotions are interacting. And of course, I think within empathy, certain emotions are coming forward for us and for our clients too. And thanks for this quote too, Elke. It's only with the heart that one can see rightly what is essential to the invisible eye. Beautiful quote there. Because it really is, in that sense, a practice. All of our competencies are learnable and practical. We aim to practice as practitioners of 6 seconds in that instance. So, and some comments there about the 3 types of empathy. Wonderful. Yes. It's often related to, what we can see and perhaps what we can't see. And a nice question from a comment here from Ilaria. What if empathy was taught in schools as part of civic reasoning? Yes, Elke, maybe you have some thoughts there about your work
Absolutely.
in a moment.
Absolutely.
Not as a nice to have behavior, but as a crucial developmental competency. And I underline that, a crucial developmental competency. Apparently, research demonstrates that civic reasoning is directly connected to youth well-being and a potential way to contribute to society. Yes, maybe we could hold some space there. Elke, you mentioned that you're working in the education space as well. I think some of us too have kids, or we work with younger people as well. You mentioned youth before, Justine. So we're interacting with people that are younger than us, whether that's primary school, high school, maybe university age people. But Elke, any thoughts around, Ilari's comment there?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of empathy being taught in schools and basically also being role model. I mean, it's obviously a circle around the child, right? Where adults, parents, everyone who's involved in the 360 around the child, we're all role modeling a behavior. And it makes me think of two other things, because the judgment that we're constantly in, either within ourselves. I mean, kids, just a friend of mine, a neighbor, has been telling me of her 6, 8, and 10-year-olds who constantly come back home and they say in French, "Je suis nul." I'm not worthwhile anything, right? And it's really harsh. I mean, how they're doing that. So and you mentioned earlier on also, David, I mean, the concept of empathy, which for me was a big aha effect, right? As coaches, we were in the giving mode all the time and we're there for others. But I discovered the self-empathy. And again, hello to Ilaria here, because I was so surprised in my assessment that the empathy part wasn't as high as I was expecting it. And I couldn't kind of make sense out of it. And I understood it was really a mixture between self-empathy and empathy. And there was not enough giving to myself. And it's still something that is in my work daily, to say, allow yourself to also give to yourself as much as you do give to others. So again, coming back to school is taking away all the bullying part, right? The being judgmental of others. And you mentioned also being curious, unfolding the other people's stories, understanding where they're coming from. It's just a difference. There's a diversity. There's no such as good or bad and the binary thinking patterns as we're in. It's just different. And learning to embrace all of those differences instead of saying it's good or bad, is just a way forward, and empathy is at the heart of it.
Yeah. And isn't that a microcosm for businesses? Like,
yes,
we don't bully each other normally. I mean, sometimes people do, of course, but yeah, how curious are we about our colleagues or about situations, or where are we judgmental, about the way people do things or don't do things, even getting home now with traffic, the way people drive, when you're in a moment of stress, like I was, the time was ticking and I thought I was in touch with my colleague Vito. Oh, I could be late. Here I am. But as the moments and minutes got closer, then at one point I had to say, great. And he was so reassuring. David, I've got it. We're here. We're all here. And then you guys, helped me out there. But you're right. This is when we're triggered maybe by our emotions. Maybe we have less resources available for empathy. We're in the busy doing mode, as you said. So how do we get back to being mode? That can really help. We have a great comment from Paul in the chat, and I'd love to explore. Then I want to ask you really about some strategies that you might have as coaches to be in the being mode in a moment. But Paul's asked here, I'd love to hear the panel's thinking around what each aspect of the model, so the cognitive, emotive, and the empathic action model from before, what it looks like when overdone. Perhaps thinking empathy overdone could lead to sympathy or pity, even perhaps. So if we take cognitive empathy, this thinking one, what do you think? If overdone or pushed too hard, what could that lead to?
You're drawn and you don't adapt properly.
Yeah.
You don't have the proper reaction.
Okay. Because you're up here in your almost rational self. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you might say something like I could have said to my colleague today, oh yeah, my grandpa died a couple of years ago. It's terrible, isn't it?
Or do something, you thought about hugging this person.
Yeah.
Maybe you could hug like this.
Yeah.
when it's not
Okay.
adapted.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeing what they might need. Yeah. Offer that. Okay. What about emotive empathy overdone? I see you
Um,
nodding there. Justine, please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, this is a really interesting one for me because I used to think there was no such thing as too much empathy. I always thought, the more empathy you have, the better. Until I read a book by a lady called Kim Scott called Radical Candor, and she has this expression, ruinous empathy, and this is where you're talking, David, about the emotive energy. And she says if you cannot there has to be a boundary as well, because if you bring too much empathy to a situation, as Benoit was talking about earlier, you can sponge up too much, you can drain yourself completely. But also you're not working in the best interests of the person that you're because you're not almost in a way your own feelings are coming into play too much. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like too subjective. And also you don't then have the ability to give them what they need, because it's almost becoming more about you than it is about them.
That makes sense.
And I thought that was really interesting because I think it's very true. And I used to think, oh, but I'm so empathetic and I'm so in tune, I'm really, but it is too draining when you do that. And sometimes you lose the ability to think clearly because you're thinking about, you identify so much that it's nearly back to your own, problems as opposed to your clients. So I totally agree. I think there's a case for just stepping back sometimes and saying it's great to be empathetic, but I also need a little bit of a boundary. And I think that's what I saw in the two professional cases I saw earlier. They held space for me, but they were not getting, overly upset by my situation in identifying with that, if that makes sense. They were able to keep now, okay, maybe that was a bit professional, and maybe in a more personal situation, it might be different. But I think there is a case in a professional scenario as coaches to have that little bit of a boundary. I think you're going to be a better coach, in my view. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. What about you, Elke?
Yeah, I also think as Justin just said, I mean, it's also a question of roles and responsibilities, right? Because as coaches, we are responsible for making sure that the coachees attain to their objectives, right? That they're getting to where they want to be. So if we're maybe overly in that emotive empathy or even cognitive one, but we're not following up in that holder or space holder of the process. Following through.
Yeah, love that. So it's almost like we're solving our own problems through other people, which is not what we should be doing, solving our own trauma in that way. Okay. And I guess, looking at empathic action, which we really define as, okay, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of feeling, and then moving towards action. Perhaps overdone, we get too much into fix-it mode too quickly, and we're not actually giving the time, so it's rushed, or it takes it, the balance is off in some way towards empathic action, perhaps, or overdone, where we're not allowing we try to do it for the person. Let me arrange the funeral, let me get the flowers, let me just take you just relax, I'll take over and I'll do it all. So that push too far, I think, would also not be good, because a person might need to process what they're going through by doing the thing as well, participating in the flowers, the funeral, or the arrangements of something, for instance. The example we often use in the program is the social worker. And I think social workers probably run a high risk of burnout and stress due to the many juggling of balls that they have to carry, where it's both action and being. With coaching, I guess we really define it as the coachee's responsibility to take action. We sort of close the book, close the case, and go, cool, I'll see you next time. And if the coachee has done nothing between sessions, well, that's on the coachee. It's not our responsibility to make them do the things that we need to. We might suggest and keep suggesting, which is our role, but playing a different role there. So that's great. So we had a question earlier. What are some barriers to empathy? That was a nice one. And Ilaria offered here could be bias, a lack of curiosity, excess judgment, fear, stress. Yeah. Anything else that comes to your minds?
Selfishness, violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Selfishness. That's a good one, isn't it? Wow. when you said
But
that.
I think, David, if it's a really deep lack of empathy, it can be because, as Benoît was talking about earlier, we need it to be modeled for us, in order to understand it, and as Elke was saying that as well, it's that it's the models that we draw from. And if people haven't had, and that's where I think Benoît comes in with the selfishness and the, if you really struggle with empathy, perhaps as a child you haven't had good role models of empathy, and as Elke and Ilaria were talking about in schools, for me that is where, for me it starts when you're young. And people, because I do find when people struggle with empathy, if you hear a little bit about their story, it often is that they haven't really had examples of empathy in their life, or they haven't just, so they don't really know how to. I've had people say to me, I'm not good at this. I find it really hard. And I find that hard when somebody says that to me, because I think, wow, gosh, that's so unusual. But that's where the curiosity comes in, and if you find out more about their story, you often find that's the case, that they haven't had very good role models, to show them.
Well, all the more reason to double down then in education in the younger years, to have
100%.
empathy. The teachers should be experiencing empathy and having courses in empathy or coaching in empathy, being able to support people. We all need support. Even coaches need support, people to turn to for that, modeled in the family as well. Yes, absolutely, Ilaria. So I'd like to shift now and ask you here to share with us perhaps maybe ways in which you personally, maybe you had a role model, Justine, or you've developed, your personal empathic skills over time. So maybe there's a practice that you regularly engage in, or there was something in something we did together in our models, or in your own thoughts and training, or something else, a way in which you aim to increase your own empathy would be my question. Justine,
that's a good one.
Sorry, is that to me? Sorry.
So all three of you.
Sorry, I didn't realize you're talking to me. Sorry.
I was looking for the non-verbal body language to see.
Okay, sorry.
I'll put her mute on, so she'll go later. Benoît, but either Justine or Benoît. Yeah.
So for me, there's a couple of things I think for me that have helped me to practice empathy. And yes, on the course, one of the things that I really did learn about that fascinated me was, David, when you talked a lot about the mirror neurons. I found that really interesting, about how we can connect with people, through looking at that behavior, and how the brain, I think when we talk a lot in the 6 seconds training about, the connection through the brain, and how the getting into that synchronicity. And for me, I do that through, it's active listening, but it's also reflective listening. So I don't always get it immediately. Sometimes I need to reflect a little bit. So I need to step back. But for me, the absolute key is the story. So I want to hear the full story, not half the story. So if somebody is struggling, if somebody's struggling with something, how I practice empathy is by listening to their story. I think everybody has a story, and I think that's the best way to try and identify with what's going on, is tell me the full story. Or, even I would question myself, am I getting the full story here? What's going on? Because if I don't understand, so it is, as Paul's just said in the chat, it's like curiosity. So active and reflective listening and curiosity, I think for me, are three ways I would practice empathy.
And I think, knowing you, it just occurred to me that I think you're very much into literature and story writing and storytelling yourself. So I guess the question is, do you also reflect on your own story as a personal practice?
I do, absolutely, I do, and I think that has helped me to be empathetic with myself, and also to understand both myself and other people better. I think journaling, meditation, all those types of things for me are practices that help me improve my empathy. And it's particularly when you are in where you're in a challenging situation. We don't always have the luxury of working with people that share our belief systems or our values. And sometimes you run up against people whose belief systems or values are very different from your own. And that's where I think the practice of empathy really comes into its own, because you have to kind of, you've really got to to say, okay, you know, what is it that I do to practice empathy? And for me, it is that it's journaling, it's meditation, it's reflecting, David, as you say, on and using reading. I mean, I read a lot, and I find empathy in books hugely, just examples of it and how people show it, develop it, use it, you know.
So there are some more role models, I guess. You've had personal role models, but you also get the literary role models, the characters, the caricatures of situations and how people use that. That's lovely. Yeah. Ben, would you like to share some thoughts?
Sure. I try to always ask myself, what is my impact now? What is my emotional impact? What is my emotional contagion? And how does it feel? How does it feel for me? How could it feel for her, for him, for them? So again, I open my sensors. I look at the cues, and I try to understand what's happening in their mind and in their heart. And how is our connection working?
I love that. So when you say
it's a stream,
I mean your eyes, your ears, you might pause and touch base, you know, feel your feet in your shoes type of that's what you mean by recognizing in that moment?
Well, it's more feeling the energy, you know, and again, the stream between us.
Yeah.
Be it a few people, be it one-to-one.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. And Elke, what about some ideas from you, personal practices?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming back to the self-empathy space of the self-care mechanisms and strategies of really holding that space for yourself and remind yourself of doing regular practice, building that muscle that we are trying to build in our clients. So it's simple. Using scaling, for example, checking in very simply, what's your number between 1 and 10? 10 is highest, couldn't be better. 1 is, well, couldn't be worse. And looking at it, and you're in that number plainly and making sense out of that and saying, okay, where I'm at. But in a sense, again, of seeing the positive aspects of saying, okay, maybe you're lower down the end at a 4 or 5. But seeing what is positive in there, what takes you to being in a 4 and a 5, not being in a 1 and a 2, and then kind of looking at it from a way of saying, okay, what are strategies that do work for me? So that might be also a simple breathing. I like to feel a balloon in my abdominal area and blow up that balloon, giving it a color. And I do that also with my children. So my daughter had also a very stressful moment, typically when they go to bed, and we want them to be calm, so everything is bubbling up. So actually calming and nudging down that a little bit and getting back into your body is something, also bringing the somatics to it. So playing somehow and experimenting with that state, with those numbers, and saying, hey, what helps? Visualizations. I like also to listen a recording of positive affirmations, of really saying it, you have what it needs, you're bringing your best intentions at heart, and really getting that into every living cell. And that's boosting. Or putting on music, like the breaking free whenever I feel rather down, or singing. I love singing. I take singing lessons, and that's really working for me, and I'm discovering the high ends. So it's wonderful. So there are a lot of things. Or I have my favorite place in the world, and that's in the southwest France, where I'm on a dune and I'm getting all the sensations with the wind and connecting with that, similar to what you just said, with the connecting with the senses. So it's the storytelling part making sense. There's so many things out there. And I think because we're all different, we need to find out what different strategies work for us as different people.
Yeah.
And
that's it. And a connection I see is the body work. You know, I was in Madrid yesterday. We were doing a 6 seconds corporate project, and you know, I'm getting the plane home at 7 o'clock at night. I get home at midnight. I wasn't in a place to give empathy at that point, for sure, at midnight last night. And so I also recognize that on a day after, I also have to be careful. Maybe you experience that as a big day of coaching. You've had a lot of sessions back to back. Trying to do that day after day, I don't think is feasible, because, you know, what I'm hearing from you all is finding the ways to recharge. It's like if we've been out, you know, had a big social event, those who are neurodivergent need time to bring it back to sort of fill the meter up again. I love what you said about 1 to 10, Elke. It might be like a fuel gauge where, yeah, if I'm really low, I've probably not got a lot of empathy for others in this moment. So can I do my best coaching? Probably not. And I'm likened to one of the ICF competencies. I was studying for my PCC earlier this year and really reviewing all that. And there was one of the experienced mentors had said, yeah, like 10, 15 minutes before you start your coaching, you shouldn't be answering emails. You shouldn't be rushing like I was tonight to get here. You shouldn't be, sometimes there are unforeseen circumstances, but if your habits are not setting you up for success in that way, then you've got to look at that. Just as if we're running on an empty tank. So we've got to find, the habits, as you say, it's very individual, but I sense a connection with body, not just feeding the mind and great stories and wonderful things help. That's nourishing, but physically nourishing as well. So perhaps a trick or a technique, a clue there is around the holistic look. And of course, that's what we're looking at in our competency model. It links to the 4 areas of life success, of which well-being is one area, health and balance. And we might say, well, I'm getting enough sleep and I'm doing, but is there balance? The balance of what I've heard tonight, being with doing. I think that's the being part we are crucial to think about. So we're running shortly out of time. I just want to jump back into the chat here. Lots of agreement with all of your comments, so that's wonderful. You can take time to read those lovely things. And Ilari has said here, empathy is so connected to care to me, and it's about shifting the perspective from us to beyond us. Yes, caring for the story of others, as you had said, Justine, and wanting to know the story of others as well. So let me ask you, what would be one piece of advice that you might give to people who would like to be more empathetic? I know we've talked about a lot already, so maybe you want to elevate something you've already said, or something new comes to your mind. But is there one sort of final piece of advice that you might have?
Well, I would say just think about last time someone was there for you. How did it feel?
Wow. Yeah.
How did it feel? And then engage in this process for others and for yourself.
Thanks, Ben. That's beautiful.
Well, I would say, yeah, if you're struggling to feel empathy, remember that we are all complex human beings with different backgrounds, different beliefs, different cultures, different upbringings. And I would say everybody has a story, and, listen to somebody's story before you judge them. Find out more about their story, because if you can find out more about their story, you can often find something that you can empathize with.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Okay.
Truly. Well, maybe very simple, just as a symbol of the heart, because we might overly think and overthink things and want to draw a lot of tools to try things out and on all of those leadership models, and truly trusting yourself in what's coming from within. And that's coming back from the mind to heart connection. And sometimes your heart has the better answers than just the mind, and it's a combination of both. So let your heart speak more often.
Yeah. And when you feel good, let your heart sing.
Yes.
You're doing so as a former opera singer, I fully endorse that 100%. Choir singing as we come towards the festive New Year season, coming together in voice in some kind of way. And I know Irish tradition is full of beautiful song, as is the French tradition, of course, and German too. So there's lots of things. So really, really lovely. And I only put one last slide here. Ways to increase empathy. I had a look at our guide. So for those, and you three, I think, have done the assessor course, but those who have certified with us or interested in training, we do have certification that helps us to unlock some of these things further. And this is kind of interesting, like almost a summary of what we've talked about tonight here. really noticing how other people are feeling. I like this one. This was from the guide. Based on a profound respect for people, even love. I don't know if I sometimes have that concept in my coaching where I feel not an erotic love, but I feel a sense of love for the person I'm seeing in front of me. That how can I really hold space for them and feel something that connects me to them? But we have to be vulnerable to do so as well. So it is about us filling the tank, being aware of our senses, opening ourselves up, and remaining curious, perhaps for those who we react to. So we mentioned that tonight, the schoolyard bullies, or perhaps in the workplace, the people that really rile us up in a certain way. So that's great. We have one last couple of comments here. So one of the best tips ever provided in my workshops was from a senior manager in banking who said he put himself in the zone of feeling privileged when talking to his people in one-to-ones. Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
Definitely.
Privileged to have the opportunity to talk to that person, I guess. Not being above, but being on an equal path, which for us as coaches, that's what we aim for. That's fabulous. So Elke, Justine, and Ben, I'd like you just to share where can people connect with you? Give a shout out to your coaching practice, or is it a LinkedIn profile? Where, if people would like to connect more with you who are watching, where would you suggest they contact you?
Ladies, please.
Yes, Justine, go first.
proactivecoaching.ie. You can find me there, and I'll put my email in the chat box if anybody wants to email me. Justine@proactivecoaching.ie.
Fantastic. Elke?
And on LinkedIn.
Yep, and on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Great. Justine McGrath. Yeah.
You can find me on LinkedIn too. I haven't set up yet my website. I can put my email in the chat too. That's helpful.
Sure. But yeah, so Elke Dervin on LinkedIn. And Ben, what about you?
Feel free to reach on LinkedIn, definitely. Benoît Lamarre, Be My Lux Consulting. It's with pleasure.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. So doing that too. So thanks to those who have attended tonight. We've had a good turnout to tonight's session. If you have any last questions you'd like to ask, our panelists may be able to remain online for another session or two. Just to mention, so tonight's webinar is from 6 seconds, and we do develop people's emotional intelligence all around the world. And we are the biggest network of emotional intelligence providers. And Justine, Elke, and Ben are a big part of that network. And we do thank you for being part of that. We have a methodology that we've been using now for over 25 years. And we know that EQ affects organizations, teams, and leaders. And it's really about integrating our methods even into adult learning, coaching, into education, of course, which is not part of the pro area, but my colleague Ilaria is in the community area and the outreach and social impact area. She's a big part of that. So we welcome you if this is the first time to our community. And of course, we're on LinkedIn, so you can connect further there as well. You could connect further with me as well. But if you'd like to scan that QR code, you'll get to our newsletter, which is often a great way to connect, being aware, being more intentional, and being purposeful in how we are actually doing the emotional intelligence. So it is a process of understanding, being, and then applying and doing that as well. So Elke, Justine, and Ben, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And to all who've watched on, and to anyone else who's watching on YouTube, maybe in time to come, thank you as well. So have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you.
Likewise.
Take care.
Thank you very much, ladies and gents. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David.